often ask that you all often ask the question, like the question of like, why did um, why did Tibet went in the direction of Vajrayana dominant tradition? It seems like a strange question to ask, but it's not. The verdict was still out there in the beginning as to which direction it could have gone. So part of it, at least in a secular point of view, explaining that is that precisely some of these elements that lend itself to reinforcing what Tibetans culturally get, which is this loyalty and fealty. Given how harsh the conditions are in Tibet,
Right.
right? So you loyalty is life and death. It's not just a pretty idea. So if someone betrays you, it could lead to the whole related group perishing. So then, the Samaya talk appealed to 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 strengthen these loyalty ties. So they adopted in the end the Vajrayana and not the other possibilities. And so being aware that this is then part of the legacy that those of us who practice Tibetan Buddhism now, and then it's a question of like how much of now through 1,500 years of development in Tibet, how much of that notion of Samaya has been shaped by Tibetan needs and therefore serve Tibetan purposes to a good extent. How much of that is what we should take?
Right.
Not that we are into designer Buddhism, not that at all, but or Buddhism by committee, and that's also not what I'm talking about. But we should be aware and should think about this issue.
Well, I really, you are a unique resource for us at EBS. Really, really appreciate it, I want to say, because, conceivably, first of all these people here on the screen right now are interested in Vajrayana Buddhism and could, in your version, Kagyu um, version, but also face will eventually, for however much they pursue this, will have this problem. If it's like, if they, how do you relate to each other if you're all doing different practices? And so if you can help us with that, I would really appreciate it. And maybe there's a couple of like a Padmasambhava and a Tara, that we could alternate and all do together, this group
Right,
as well as these other people I'm
right,
talking about
right, right.
that are indisputable in terms of
Yeah, right, right.
their quality and
Yeah,
authenticity, you
yes,
but not necessarily derivative from any
yes,
particular lineage. And so
right, right.
it would be enormously helpful if you could help us do that. And so then on Sunday mornings, we would have a practice session from 10 to 11, like we always had, where we would actually be practicing Vajrayana. Then we would have this book study where we're studying with you. And that would be, I mean, for me, that was always a really great combination. And maybe some of these folks in this group would like to join the practice one at 10. And, it's a full, robust Vajrayana presence. That's the idea. We want to,
Right,
when we
right,
reopen, have a very well developed, refreshed,
right,
Vajrayana
right,
at
right,
EPS for the whole sake of the community.
right, right. I mean, there are Tara practices, for example, that are from the Indian
Yeah.
tradition.
Hmm.
So yes, of course, they always come down to us through different lineages.
Hmm.
But there are sadhanas that there's a collection of sadhanas called the sadhana mala.
Hmm.
And the sadhana mala is from India, you know, it's like pre Tibetan Buddhism into different lineages. So you would think, you know, like a sadhana like that is like, well, you know, it's composed by Indian masters. Like
Yeah.
it's the common heritage of, you know, Tibetan
Right.
Buddhists. So yeah, so I think there are, and then you have, you know, Tara practices that are derivative of that.
Hmm.
Then especially like Dharma traditions and all of that, then that's, you know, kind of specialized into different areas, not just different lineages, but also their origin story is a little different, you know. Dharma, I mean, even Terma, in theory, Terma came from mostly Guru Rinpoche, and Guru Rinpoche came from India.
Right. Right.
But
Well,
anyway,
I just whatever it'll be an ongoing call. We aren't even reopening the building for a month probably.
uh-huh,
So and then we need to build a new shrine box and stuff. There's stuff going on,
uh,
but basically, your help would be much
yeah,
appreciated.
yeah, sure. Good. Well,
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to take all this time, guys. It's okay.
well, as I said, you know, you all have some dog in this fight,
Phew.
so to say.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me pull up something I want to share with you. Let me see if I can find it. Actually, I want to share screen. If Melissa, if you can assign me as co-host, then I can share screen.
Mhm.
Okay, I think I can do that now. Okay, you all see this?
Mhm.
Yeah, so today is the anniversary of Pamodrupa. Pamodrupa being one of the three key students of Gampopa. The other one being Barom Dharma Wangchuk, the Barompa lineage, which there is a family, Tuku Ugyen's family, is traces themselves to Barum. But for all intents and purposes, Barum Kagyu don't exist as a, you know, full-fledged tradition. Then the third, being the most famous of the three, is the first Karmapa, Dusung Khenpa. Then Pamodrupa, in terms of being like influential, in the sense you could say he was of the three maybe the most influential, in that from him comes the 8 other traditions of Kagyu. So his disciples went on to found like Drigung Kagyu, for example, Drukpa Kagyu, Talong Kagyu. These are the 3 that still exist of the 8. Then there is like Tselpa Kagyu, Shukshat Kagyu, Yerpa Kagyu, and so on and so forth. So himself was a very influential teacher, so that, you know, he attracted so many students who then, you know, went on to become great masters in their own right. So, born in 1110 in eastern Tibet, Kham. Many people during that time, around that time, eastern Tibet were not easy, those places. So here it says poverty-stricken parents. And like, for example, one of his students, Jigten Sumgun, his parents, I think, died of starvation. There were very frequent occurrences of starvations in the 12th century. So goes back to that whole loyalty business. The conditions were really harsh, not easy. Anyway, his younger brother founded one of what's known eventually as the 6 mother monasteries of the Nyingma tradition. Kato, the Kentru to the north of you guys, he's from Kato. So Pomodrupa's younger brother started the Kato monastery. Pomodrupa himself became a main student of Gampopa. But before he became Gampopa's student, he was actually one of the key figures in his own time in the Sakya tradition. And so he was a highly trained Sakyapa master. So here, let's see. So here you see the mention of Kato, yeah? Yeah. So anyway, and here it says, it was said that before he was 3, Pomodrupa could remember how he was once a monkey during the time of Buddha Kashyapa, one of the way, way back Buddhists of the past. Then, okay. Yeah, so here at the age of 20, he went to central Tibet. So at that time, central Tibet was like where all the important teachers were. So eastern Tibet was in the 12th, 13th centuries. They were like the far off, cowboy lands. But many great masters in Tibetan Buddhism came from the far east, eastern Tibet. In the US, it's the Wild West, right? In Tibet, it's the Wild East, east of central Tibet. Many great masters are from there, like himself, like Karmapa, Dusung Khenpa, like Jigten Sumgun. Many came from eastern Tibet area. So anyway, you had to go to central Tibet to be fully educated. So there he got full ordination. And at first, primarily studied and trained with Kadampa teachers. Then later, teachers of practically every tantric lineage that then existed. And finally, he settled for long-term training in Sakya with Sachen Kunga Ningpo. Sachen Kunga Ningpo, Sa Chen, Chen is like great, the great Sakyapa Lama Kunga Ningpo. Sachen Kunga Ningpo was one of the 5 great patriarchs of the Sakya lineage. So he became a key student of Sachen, the great Sakyapa. And he mastered the Sakya system called Lamdre, which is the path and the fruit. Lama Kunga, I think, is a Sakyapa Lama. Yeah, Charlotte's teacher. So Lamdre, and in fact, his own writings on the Lamdre continues to survive and to be transmitted. So here it says Bedzoma. So he became an important teacher of his own in the Sakyapa context. Then eventually he left Sakya and joined to become a student of Gampopa. So it is said that he first went to Gampopa because Gampopa was gaining a lot of students. And so this was a time where, sectarian, like the way we know lineages now, did not really exist yet. And there was actually a very vibrant cross-pollination between. So lineages at this point isn't so much about the way we think of lineages now. Kagyu, Nyingma, Sakya, Gelug, Kadam. Lineages was more in the spiritual sense of like, for every practice that you do, there is a line that you got it from. You got it from your teacher, who got it from, their teacher and their teacher and their teacher all the way back, so to say. So especially writings that you find from the 13th, prior to the 13th century, whenever they talk about lineage, we have to be very careful not to project back things that only started to happen maybe around 14th century back into the early period. The early period, there's a lot of moving around. People move in and out, people are connected to each other in many different contexts. We might share the same kind of line in terms of the transmission of a particular text, a particular sutra, a particular area of specialization, the study of logic, the study of philosophy, the study of medicine included, and so on and so forth. But anyway, Pamodrupa went to Gampopa not so much with the intention to become a student, but with the intention of showing how Gampopa's interpretation is off. He went there to challenge Gampopa. Anyway, instead of succeeding in challenging Gampopa, he never went back to Sachen Kunga Ningpo. He stayed and became a devoted student of Gampopa. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, and then Gampopa was ill-disposed. Then a hermit in the area of east of the city of Setang. Setang is in southern central Tibet, which is where airport is now. Setang, a couple of hours from Lhasa. A place called Pamodru, which is Sao Crossing. So then he stayed after Gampopa passed, I think. Then he went to this area and stayed in retreat. Gradually, other meditators came there and built their own huts. And many of these that came were people primarily grounded in the Kadampa tradition. And the Kadampa tradition at this point there were two branches of the Kadampa at this point. There is one branch of the Kadampa which is only Kadampa in the sense that in the sense of like Okay, that branch of Kadampa is the philosophical branch. Okay, Kadampa, at this point, there are two branches, you could say. There was a philosophical college that was built, monastery / college, that was very active. And they called themselves Kadampa because the founder of that monastery traced his spiritual lineage to Kadampa. But insofar as their specialty and what they focus on, it was not exactly what Atisha was all about. Yeah, so this is the philosophical and therefore also the study of logic. So this monastery called Sangpu Monastery, and the Kadampas there. But the mainstream Kadampas were ascetics, meditators. So Gampopa himself came from that background. So Gampopa himself was from that background. So Gampopa's Kadampa masters were ascetics, were hermits. Gampopa's Kagyu master was also ascetic hermit, Milarepa. But Milarepa was a freelance hermit. Gampopa's Kadampa masters were monastic vow holding hermits. But they were similar in being mostly shunned, big organizations, shunned, big display of, silver mandalas, golden bowls, all of that. So when Pamodrupa himself went into retreat, and the people who came to join him were the Kadampas who were also of that leaning. Then slowly, Pamodrupa gathered a lot of disciples. It is said that he had 500 parasol bearing disciples. And that's a monastic term to mean that these 500 disciples were masters in their own right. They had their own disciples. But Pamodrupa had 500 of these disciples. So Pamodrupa continued to live in this little hut throughout his life until he passed away. So he never built what we today would call a monastery. But all these 500 disciples and whoever else that came, they built huts all around him. His main hut is like way up. I went, oh my gosh, it's like you have to be really determined to want to go see him. He didn't build it in the valley, he built it way up high. The government, the local government, built a road up there. And that road was like miles of, you can see the hut from down in the valley, but it took forever to get up there. So people have to be really determined in order to reach him. So Pamodrupa famously was very, even back in the 12th century, he kept a vegetarian diet. He did not use alcohol and meat for the feast offerings. And he was very kind of disciplined and emphasized like poverty. So here, what I want to share with you is, by the way, this website, this resource, Treasury of Lives, is great for all these little short biographies of key figures in Tibetan Buddhism. So here, the person, Dan Martin, this Israeli scholar, he says, the following is a brief example of Pamodrupa's teachings with their emphasis on meditation. It is taken from this text called The Jewel Leather. The persons who rely on these philosophies may have achieved certainty through their own intellects in their various diverse views. But since they have neither understood nor realized these through meditation practice, theirs are views devoid of realization. He himself spent many years studying these philosophies. Now, a footnote, the Sakyapa tradition began as a tradition that was family-centered. So it was basically one powerful aristocratic family called the Kun family. So the Kun family, initially Sakyapa is basically the sons of this family being the main holders of the traditions. And it started as a tradition that were almost exclusively focused their energies on the Tantras, on Vajrayana, and studying Indian commentaries of the Tantras. Then maybe one generation before Pamodrupa, I think, they got interested. One of the key figures in that family got interested in like the academic side of things. And then started to really became like great authorities on studying logic and debate and philosophy and all of that. So by the time Pamodrupa arrived at Sakya, Sakya has already kind of started to emphasize not only tantric philosophical studies, but sutric philosophical studies. So here, when Pamodrupa says, the persons who rely on these philosophies, he's talking about himself in the past and the people that he knew, and he's talking about book learning, in other words. So he says, even though they might think they have achieved certainty in their minds, in their own intellects, or you could just say in their own minds, and how do they do that? Through upholding on the one hand, right, and upholding on the one hand their views and disputing what they consider to be wrong views. So he says, you can have experience of a certain kind of certainty when using logic. You convince yourself, and if you're really good, you convince others that your understanding, your view is the best, and others are wrong. He says, but since they have neither understood nor realized these views, so the views themselves need not be wrong necessarily, but because these views have not been realized through meditation practice. Now, meditation practice, again, it's not limited to formal seated meditation. Right? Again, he's not necessarily saying that they have not sat enough quietly. Whenever you see the word meditation, remember that it's probably, not always, but probably the word is cultivate. So they have not cultivated this in their hearts. Meaning it's just intellectually they got it, but it never really entered their heart, So their views are, in the end, devoid of realization. noble rumors, not noble truths. At best. What is the problem with that? This next part, yeah? Not just for 3 limitless eons, which is the normal length of time, it says, for a very devoted practitioner of the Bodhisattva path. It's said that it takes 3 incalculable eons to become a Buddha. So this is the reference. Not just for 3 limitless eons, but even for 1,000,000 they may follow this procedure, right? Reaching certainty through disputing with others and amping up your position. Even if you did that for 1,000,000 eons, still there is no squeezing oil from husks. They may plow and hoe the winter ground, but come spring there will be no result. Those who want to go east waste their steps going west. People suffering from the sweltering heat desire shade, but surely if they go again and again to bask by the bonfire, they will just go on suffering from the heat. It's like, it's useless. My small team of translators must be the blessings of Pamodrupa. While I was asleep between last night and this morning, because a couple of them is in Asia. And one of them it's been a long while since he finished any translations for me. Between last night and this morning, and then I woke up at 4 because my Airbnb people left, and I woke up and I looked at my phone, and Lo, who is in Eastern Tibet, completed 3 short translations, and 2 of them in their titles says, "Get rid of your books." In the title, even it says, part of the title is like, "Get rid of your books." You just put them aside, So, and Lo actually said, "I don't know what happened today. It must be Pamodrupa's blessings, like suddenly, So, yeah, so Pamodrupa's attitude it came from. It's one thing to say, I mean, I have a prejudice here, I'll confess, someone who is not very schooled, right, in the books, saying, "Get rid of the books," you're like, yeah, of course, Pamodrupa, he knew the books, and he said, guess what? Get rid of your books. Between him and Gampopa, he was definitely more educated than Gampopa. Then between him and Jigten Sumgön, like the founder of Drigung Kagyu, Jigten Sumgön was definitely not as educated as Pamodrupa. So when I say, when others say get rid of the books, you're like, so even me, with the founder of Drigung Kagyu, he says get rid of books. I was like, yeah, that's because, you didn't really look at the books that much, And Gampopa too, relative to Pamodrupa. But Pamodrupa studied tantric commentaries, which was what the Sakyapas excelled in. But Gampopa in some ways rejected overly relying on commentaries. Gampopa rejected over dependence on commentaries. Now, when they say get rid of the books, right? They don't mean like just any book. Like in Jigden Sumgön's biography, an early, not in the biography, but a praise that one disciple wrote about him. It says that he never, in his waking hours, Jigden Sumgön, there is rarely a time that you will see him without a text in his hand. Yeah? So when he says get rid of the books, he's talking about get rid of amassing knowledge and information for the sake of knowledge and information, and puffing up your ego with you thinking, oh, I know this, I know this, I know this, I know this, I know that, I know this, I know that, I know the ins and outs of this debate and all of that. But instead, if you read it as, how do I change my mind? How do I change my mind? How do I change my mind? And that is meditation. That is cultivation. You know? Not like, do I know the three of this and then the three of this? Each of them is divided into 5. That is what you should get rid of. But if studying in that way can help you change your mind, then good. So in his biography, in that praise, it says, he was never without a text in his hand. People might come and ask him, consult, he will put that down and talk to them. Then once they're gone, he goes back to. And we have evidence that these masters in this early Kagyu, if they read not commentaries, but the Buddha word. The Tibetan Buddhist canon is divided into, it's a peculiar division, because in India, in Indian Buddhism, whether the Mahayana tradition or the Theravada tradition, they have kept the division of the scriptures into the 3 baskets, right? You've heard of that, Tripitaka. The Vinaya, the Sutras, and the Abhidharma. China also kept that organization. Only in Tibet, somehow, they have their own division into 2 categories. What they call Kagyu, which means Ka is the words of Buddha. It's an honorific. It literally just means word, but Ka is something that only Buddhas have. So Kagyu, Gyur is translated. The translated words of the Buddha, Kagyu. Then Tengyur. Teng is commentary. The translated commentaries on the words of the Buddha. So they divide them into these 2 categories. So these early Kagyupa masters, Gampopa, Pamodrupa, Jigten Sumgön, once they converted, so to say, to Gampopa's style of practice, if they mostly read the Kagyu. They didn't spend much time anymore with commentaries. Then commentaries would give rise to what? Sub-commentaries. Which in turn give rise to sub-commentaries. And then sub-commentaries. And then auto-commentary, right? You write a commentary, then you write a auto-commentary of the commentary that you wrote. And in that sense, like from another perspective, Tibet, this really stark, almost impossible place to live, it's amazing that their intellect, their intellectual energy went in the direction of mastering these texts, these intellectual tradition. Yeah, I mean, putting aside Gampopa's criticism of that kind of engagement, looking at it from like human history and civilization, you're like, oh my gosh, So something to be said about living in a harsh environment turns your mind inwards, you know. You're not like busy, like, you know, pruning, you know, trees in your garden. Then they turn to, you know, developing their intellect. From that perspective, it's really amazing. Then, of course, the Gelugpa tradition that the Dalai Lama comes from, really emphasizes learning. And Dalai Lama right now keeps emphasizing learning, you know. I think it's necessary for especially Tibetans, because they have also become very kind of ritual-based traditions. Chanting, performing pujas. But the early Kagyupas went in a different direction. Also, now I'm reading Gampopa's collected works. It's not translated, but if anyone is interested, it's really dense. It's geeks who likes books. There is a European scholar who basically every page of this earliest available edition of the collected works of Gampopa, published in 1520, is in 2 volumes. For every page of the folio, these are folios, right? He summarizes the content of every folio. And it's amazing, you know, how much he basically read through the whole Gambum of Gampopa, the whole collected works. Then every folio, then he'll start with, like, you know, this folio starts with the following words, and ends with the following. But that 2 volume is not available electronically. So I found later editions. That the one I found is like 4 volumes. So the pagination is off. So I have to go match to look for the Tibetan and to see where it corresponds. Not that I can read Tibetan. I can pick up enough words to make it interesting to see what's going on. And this has been, again, thankfully, in a sense, I guess you could say, it so far what I've seen matches with what I'm already understanding about this early Kagyupa tradition, which is de-emphasizing commentarial traditions, de-emphasizing overall, not completely, but de-emphasizing very esoteric tantric stuff, like the forceful yogas, winds, drops, channels, you know, semen retention, blah blah blah, stuff like that. It's like no, just let that go, all that stuff, you know, which the Sakyapas really criticize Gampopa for doing. They said that he perverted the teachings because you cannot talk about Mahamudra outside the context of the 4 empowerments, and when you come to the second and the third, it necessarily involves manipulating psychic energy with or without, you know, physical sexual practices. With or without, there's a range of you know, positions there. But Gampopa basically just did away with all of that and said, no, that's not necessary. Devotion to the Guru is the only criterion that you need to prepare for Mahamudra practice. Whereas Sakyapa say, no, you have to train in all the steps of tantric system. So these two styles, right, you already see in India. Even in general Indian religion. You have the yogic tradition, and then you have the bhakti tradition. Yeah, in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about this. Right? You have the karma yoga and the bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is represented in present time for us, most commonly, the Hare Krishnas. It's all about bhakti, devotion. Of course, their bhakti is the sweaty, sticky bhakti. Our devotion to the Guru is like the James Dean cool kind of devotion, cool. Then when Gampopa talks about devotion to the Guru, he's not even necessarily talking about like chasing after a human being. He talks about praying to the Guru. Just praying, just supplicating to whatever abstract or non-abstract force that you have confidence will help you see that your nature and the nature of this other is inseparable. So it's an impersonal devotion, if you can call it that Gampopa sees as a shortcut so that you don't have to enter the dangerous territory of all that energy stuff. Yeah, which, Pamodrupa, coming back to Pamodrupa, was trained in that. Gampopa trained in that, interestingly, with Milarepa. So that's the irony there. With the Kadampas, he never got to the experience. He never got to the experience. So he felt like he had reached a limit with his Kadampa teachers. So he asked permission from his Kadampa teachers and said, I heard about this Milarepa. The Kadampa teachers were really worried, oh, wait, you're going to go to some charlatan, I mean, there were lots of these people running around in the mountains, claiming to have realization. So they're like, no, don't go, just continue. You got everything from us. Just continue practicing. The moment will come. But he wasn't convinced, It said that he overheard 3 beggars talking about this Milarepa figure. Then he got curious. And then there was some sort of, karmic stuff, right? Hair standing on end, like heard Milarepa, the typical. So he went. So Milarepa taught him this energy stuff. And he spent 13 months, I think, with Milarepa. 13 months, I think, with Milarepa, Gampopa. So this Gampopa study I was telling you about, the author, he also said, it seems like Gampopa arrived among Milarepa's inner circle right when Milarepa was having a particular hard time with, guess who? Remember him? Rechongpa. Right when Milarepa was having a particular difficult time with Rechongpa, Gampopa turned up. So Milarepa turned his attention to Gampopa.
We read last week, we read the start of the chapter on Milarepa.
On Gampopa.
Yeah,
turning up, right? Yeah.
Showing up, yeah. We're reading Chogyam Trungpa's book about Milarepa too.
Uh-huh.
He talks about auspicious coincidence too.
Yes.
The timeliness.
Yeah, Tendra. Yeah.
Together.
Yeah. And so, so even though then 13 months of being with Milarepa, in fact, in the standard like biography of Milarepa and Gampopa, it is said that Milarepa even said to Gampopa, yes, I know you said you have all these transmissions from those Kadampas, but the Kadampas, they don't have the mojo. He said, Milarepa supposedly said, they don't have the mojo. And you're never going to reach anywhere without the real stuff. Milarepa said, I have the real stuff. I can teach you. And then even a statement like Milarepa says, Atisha's sponsor, who was also in the Kadampa tradition, the main successor of Atisha. So he's like Tibetan main patron. Initial invitation of Atisha to Tibet was by kings of Western Tibet. But eventually, Atisha's main patron / disciple was Dromtompa in central Tibet. So apparently Milarepa says that Dromtom is a demon because he prevented Atisha from teaching the mojo. In his limited, Dromtom's limited view, Dromtom, according to Milarepa, was too concerned about public opinion and so didn't want Atisha to teach things that were potentially risque. Again, alluding to some sexual energy stuff. So Milarepa is saying Atisha knows those things because any legitimate great master from India would know those things. He says, but Dromtom the demon prevented him, and therefore the Kadampas don't have that. Now, scholarly academic studies said this was inserted in the biography of either Gampopa or Milarepa at a time where, in the 14th century, sectarian stuff have surfaced. So whether Milarepa actually said that or not, hard to tell. But enough for us to know that Gampopa did feel that he had reached some kind of a, dead end, so to say, with his Kadampa teachers. So he went looking for this itinerant crazy man in the mountains. 13 months later, he left Milarepa and went to a desolate mountain, Dakla Gampo, in southern Tibet. Desolate. And he went there and he stayed there. Then again, his Kadampa acquaintances and fellow disciples eventually went there and moved there and stayed with him. And then that's how his community grew. But over time, whatever it was that he learned from Milarepa, which he passed down to like first Karmapa to Palmodrupa, but over time you see a clear trajectory whereby Gampopa started to emphasize less and less and less all the energy manipulation things. In fact, energy manipulation things fall under the category of Hatha Yoga. And Hatha means forceful. So you have to use force to harness. So those techniques in Gampopa's collected works, there is one category like that, which pertains to the 6 yogas of Naropa. So Gampopa did teach and did write about it, but also it's clear that the majority of his works, of his teachings, especially from later part of his life, he started to kind of distance himself from those. Then he started to say, actually, you can take those techniques as a basis for your Mahamudra training, but there's another way, which is devotion to the Guru. And again, not necessarily Guru as a person, yeah, but as that principle. So this is like the shortcut. Less risky.
Seems like it might be just an emphasis on usefulness.
Yes.
And is that why Dupa was
Pamudrupa?
yeah, Pamadrupa was, he read commentary a lot, you said.
Yes.
And
Earlier.
'cause that
Under
was-
Sakyapa training.
But that was sort of like for, I mean, in that kind of an analysis of that kind of stuff, it's a matter of like matching it with your own experience to see what's useful that can be pulled out of those. Because I was also, it sounded like you were saying that a lot of that commentary was just so insular and so logical, but not really based on experience.
Yeah, and also speculative.
Right.
Yeah, I mean not like not at all like speculative based on research on the internet. This is like principled speculative philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Message boards. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Not like I researched message boards. This is like principle, rigorous, speculative philosophy. System building, that's the other part of it, And so then again, tracing to an earlier point of the development of the Buddhist tradition, the Abhidharma is essentially the prototype of this kind of speculative. It's an attempt to present a system. What Buddha taught, Buddha did not teach system. It's in the wake of Buddha's passing, then the burden fell on his disciples to articulate a system. So system formation, then with system formation, right? What do you need to do? System maintenance. Then with system maintenance, right? System defense. Establishing and disputing. Can't hear you, Jim. Can't hear you, Jim.
Okay, there we go. Can you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then the system becomes more important than if the system was built to
Serve.
work.
Yeah, system maintenance took precedence over why in the first place the system was there. The system was built. Yeah. It takes on a life of its own and its set of demands. Yeah. And going through the collected works of Gampopa, again and again you see him saying, to really practice the Dharma, you don't need to know so much. Knowledge becomes an obstacle, he says. Also very interesting, right? In so far at least, and I'm kind of impatient. I go front and then come back and try to follow every folio and then jump again and come back again, At least I do come back to make sure I go through every folio. There is no evidence at this point that this early community practiced a lot of different deities. There was no evidence of that. In fact, the person summarizing these folios, he says that barely any names of deities are mentioned. Instead, it's generic. It says, meditate on the Yidam. That's it. So no emphasis on. Again, right? A lot of the deities that we practice now and all the various sadhanas of the various deities, if it is Nyingma, then it's Dharma tradition. If it is not Nyingma, meaning the other three, the new, Sarma, which means the Kadampa, Sakyapa, and Kagyupa, yeah, most of this comes through the Sakyapas. So the Sakyapas were the ones who sought out, like for example, the transmission of the sadhana mala, which has over 1,000 sadhanas. So the jewel garland of sadhanas, sadhana mala, an Indian Buddhist collection. I think it has like 1,000 sadhanas. Every deity has at least 5 to 10 sadhanas. That transmission comes through the Sakyapas. So the Sakyapas, really invested in the transmission of entire, you could say, Buddhist culture, not just the Dharma, but Buddhist culture from India to Tibet. They became the most complete in that sense, you have to say, yeah, in terms of a complete culture being lifted from India into Tibet, and of course over time adapted. The Sakyapas did a great job with that. But people like Gampopa were resisting that kind of importation. But everyone and every style has a role to play in the whole big picture. I don't think we should be hearing what I'm talking about as who got it right and who got it wrong. But it is, to share this is to say, it's not necessarily like what you are learning from your teachers. It's not necessarily like this is how it is. Because some of these historical processes are lost upon many. Yeah, so little mention of deities. And even like, right, in the Milarepa songs, right? There's no this deity, that deity, barely, here and there. Yeah, you might get one or two mentioned. But he never teach, for example, on, let us talk about Avalokiteshvara. Let us talk about Tara, right? Let us talk about this. No. It's all about meditation. Realizing mind, nature of mind, yeah, how experiences relate to essence. Throughout the whole text, it's all on that. Somewhere, so now, again, moving in another direction, about the view, right? The view. So in the collected works of Gampopa, he says, some people criticize us and say we Kadampas. So this is another interesting thing. In his collected works, he would write like that, we Kadampas. Not a single instance of we Kagyupas. Why? Because the identity Kagyu is not there yet. It came in the 14th century. But the identity of Kadampa was already there. So he would say, Nye Kadampe, in Tibetan, Nye, we Kadampas. So he would say, some people criticize us and say we Kadampas don't have an emphasis on view. then he says, it is not that we don't have an emphasis on view. It's just that we don't care for those words used to talk about the view. He says, of course, we have view. But he says, but our view is the result of practice, of cultivating. We arrive at the view through experience. What we don't care about is views that exclusively is the result of words. And he says, what we don't care about are all the words, the endless words regarding view. And that's definitely Milarepa. Also like that. But I think the difference between Milarepa and Gampopa's Kadampa teachers isn't so much this point. I think they both agree. View arrived at through disputing and mincing words and splitting hairs. That's not the view. Both the Kadampa masters and Milarepa, they are in agreement. But because there is another branch of the Kadampas who are into debate, who are into systems, right, and the study of systems, later sectarian things have kind of overextended the critique of what Kadampa is. And forgotten an earlier layer of Kadampa where it's very much like Milarepa style.
It seemed even clear from the songs that he'd be challenged every so often by somebody who says, "Oh, you think you know some," but it was always territorial.
Yes.
In nature, it's like
yes.
a center being kind of like they're going to take away our students.
Yes, right.
We have to prove them wrong, and it's sort of like, defensive that way.
Yes, it's always about turf.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're going to what's the word? The expression. You're going to mess up the market.
Yeah, that's our market.
How can you sell it so cheap? You're going to ruin the market for us, Aside from you're going to take business away from us, it's like overall you're going to ruin the market for us. Now, back then, I would say in defense or in to be more generous, even towards the people who do that, it's like they are only doing it as a matter of survival. It's not really us now. Us now is more than survival. It's really name, fame, but in many of those cases, it's subsistence living. Everyone. There wasn't a lot of surplus wealth that we're talking about. The surplus of wealth came later, for sure. But then by that point, monasteries became the part of the economy. Yeah, so the conspicuous consumption of Tibetans centered around monasteries and monastic calendar, monastic ritual. Whereas our conspicuous consumption is centered around the individual. Yeah. And the Tibetan conspicuous consumption was centered around ritual events. Right? So the continuous, endless cycles of ritual, public ritual events, yeah, That's how the economy circulated, right? That's how money circulated. Yeah? From patrons to monastery to artisans to tradesmen, back to the patrons. Craftsmen, creating ritual objects, importing raw material. That was how the Tibetan economy, for the most part, starting from 17th century, is quite clear. The main machine of the Tibetan economy were the monasteries. But there were always people who preferred to remain further up from the monastery, in their huts, in their caves, practicing. And that's where the lifeline, of the transmission continues. And that's, in that way, it has come down to us. I mean, to the degree that we got it, I don't know. Whether we got it yet or not, if we got it, it comes from there, Yes.
So in other words, not so much from the institutionalized.
Yeah. I mean, the institutionalized makes it possible for the continuity of the ones up, further up in the huts and in the mountains. Yeah. Because the huts, and the caves, it's only possible. So it's an interdependence, Without a culture signing on to the basic, right, agreement that this is good for us, what are the chances you can remain up in the caves without being called down? We need another hand to farm. Yeah? So as much as the institutionalized, we may not appreciate. But we should not be blind to how, without that piece, probably you won't have. Like us, like our context now, right? Like if one or two of us want to say, I'm checking out, I'm going to go practice. Our social forces keep pulling us back. But in the Tibetan context, the whole culture signed on to this whole deal. So there's the worldly samsaric side of this for sure. The institutions, the hierarchy, the rankings, the politics, all of that. But it also allowed for those special beings to be able to go do their thing and keep the lineage going. So Ray Chongpa, right? His lineage, no institution, so poofed, gone. So if Gampopa and more so his disciples, because Gampopa himself also did not build monasteries, neither did Pamodrupa, for example, neither did the first Karmapa. First Karmapa, itinerant. But as he moved, more and more people followed him. So this Garchen, they call it, the Great Encampment. His whole life, he would just went place to place to place to place. Everywhere he went. And that's also, from another perspective, right? It's an economic machine moving. People would offer livestock. then that became part of the support of the encampment. And the encampment grew as it went, I said this is the original, the first Karmapa, this is the original pop-up Dharma.
Sounds a little bit like Shakyamuni Buddha, where he kind of traveled around, and then in
Yeah.
a whole town would build up around him,
Yeah,
kings and so forth. So
yeah, the original pop-up Dharma. Another book, if you are interested, maybe I already talked about this, to read, to get a one that is maybe more indicative and more tells us more about, like what is Tibetan Buddhism, like these days, and where it comes from, is the book by Alex Gardner called The Life of Jamgon Kongtrul the Great. Jamgon Kongtrul, a great Rime master, the great Jamgon Kongtrul. He lived in the 19th century, and he's one of the key, if not the key figure in the so-called non-sectarian Rime movement. In some ways, especially the Kagyu Nyingma traditions, if Jamgon Kongtrul did not do what he did, and then communist China came, then many of the traditions would have been destroyed and cut off. But Jamgon Kongtrul went around collecting all these traditions, and then throughout his life would give wholesale transmission of these cycles of teachings. And in that way, every big name Lama of different lineages were recipients of these teachings outside of their own tradition. And so in that way, it remained unbroken. Till now, we have it because of Jamgon Kongtrul. And that book is very, to me, I also started reading that, tells us a lot of things. So one thing I shared on Facebook a few weeks ago is that, if we say, our conditions are not conducive to Dharma practice, you just wait, You think, 19th century Eastern Tibet was a better condition? Well,
It was about the time of this American Civil War, right? About 1860, 70.
yeah, contemporaneous to that time. Yeah. So the basic story there is he was born in a Bonpo family. Then, for various reasons, the local chieftain of that area was a monk, but he was a chieftain because it's family. Yeah, he's part of that family. So even though he became a monk, and he became a Drukpa Kagyu monk, yeah, for some reason the chieftain took an interest in this boy and took him from the family and dropped him off at a Nyingma monastery. Drop him off at Shechen. Shechen is also one of the 6 great monasteries. Today, Shechen is most directly linked with Dögo Khyentse Rinpoche. So Jamgon Kongtrul was dropped off at Shechen. And it seems like, according to Gardner's research, it says that not because the chieftain had a particular connection to Shechen, because the chieftain was actually a Drukpa Kagyu monk. But neither was he a very 100% Drukpa Kagyu, It's more like, I'm a monk. I got my vows from the Drukpa Kagyu. He wasn't that committed to, he just dropped Jamgon Kongtrul off at Shechen because somebody said, they provide good education. So he dropped him off there. After a few years, and Jamgon Kongtrul was very happy at Shechen, just an ordinary monk, but he was very sharp, and people were starting to recognize the talent that was in him. enough so that somebody went to the chieftain and said, why don't you bring him over here? And where is over here? A Kagyu, a major Kagyu monastery called Pelpung. Pelpung is the seat of the Situpas, the Thai Situ Rinpoches. Pelpung. So then the chieftain took him and dropped him off at Pelpung. Oh, he hated that. He really, throughout his life, he never got over that trauma of being taken out of Shechen and dropped off at Pelpung. Gardner says even in his 70s when he fell ill, he blamed it on that. He never got over that trauma. He said, you know, the samaya that was broken there, is continuing to have negative effects. So he was dropped off at Pelpung, and then of course treated with like, you're an outsider, you are an Nyingma, you know, why are you here? By the rank and file. But one of the key figures at Pelpung recognized his talent, started to want to solidify his standing in the Pelpung community. So went to Tai Situ, head of Pelpung, with a proposal that he be recognized as a tuku of a somewhat obscure but important enough Pelpung monk that passed away. So Gong Tru, right, the name? Tru is tuku from Gongpo, this area in southern Tibet. So his name Gong Tru means tuku of this Gongpo Lama, Gong Tru, right? So they enthrone him as that tuku, but he never accepted that. So later in life, when he became famous, right, he wrote his about his past lives. He completely ignored that figure, basically saying, "No, I'm not the tuku of that guy." But even that, when he went to Pelpung, he needed the chieftain to support him. So it also shows us, like in the 19th century, you know, you're becoming a monk. The monastery only provided you housing. Everything else, your family, your friends has to provide. And if you don't have enough family and friends to provide for you, then you work for another monk who has a family rich enough to employ you to work for them. Yeah, so it's very different from like what we know from the Theravada context. And so when we confuse the two, we get very frustrated. Especially when Americans become monks or nuns. They have the Theravada model in their mind, and then when they turn up in a Tibetan monastery, and that's not how it plays out, it gets really frustrating and confusing. In the Tibetan system, you had to fend for yourself. Your biological networks continue to have to advocate for you, to support you, to provide for you. Then, of course, with Westerners turning up, you know, like Caleb, you know, can you imagine him telling his parents, you have to support me now for the rest of my life? Yeah.
Yeah, Caleb's the one from Little Rock.
Yeah.
Yep.
His mom's a student of Chokinimas anyways.
Yes, yes.
It works out. No, it's interesting. So Gampopa was schooled in Naropa? Was Gampopa originally schooled in Naropa?
No, Kadampa monk.
No. But he was just purely. I'm thinking of Marpa, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Marpa went to India and met Naropa, yes.
Yeah, so that's where I got a little bit because Marpa had somebody had gone to. I thought it was Marpa who wanted to travel around and get more education, and the place that monastery he went to study demanded that he provided his own food. That was in one of the songs or one of the
Yeah, yeah, Nalanda.
Nalanda.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, even in India at that time, it's like you got to fend for yourself, you know.
okay,
Yeah.
but he's kind of expected to be taken care of. That was his expectation. Was
Yes.
what's
Yes.
what's the deal? So I was like, oh, he was carrying with him some idea of like,
Mm-hmm.
there, you're going to take care of me.
Right. Right.
And
But no, it's all, and then also like to receive the teachings and to receive transmissions, it's all cost money.
you know,
I think I talked about this a little bit. It's like,
Yeah.
of course, money is never just money, you know. Money in different periods of time, in different cultures, mean different things. I'm only just starting to understand a little bit of that. Doesn't mean the same thing, you know. Money in our culture, the main framing is a capitalist. So it comes with all the meanings and the burdens of capitalism. Yeah. So now for, say, someone in this context to say, oh, you want an empowerment? How much gold have you brought? Yeah. Has one set of meanings from even laying aside Naropa was a great being, Milarepa was a great being. Put aside all of that culturally. When Naropa says to Marpa, you want empowerment? How much gold did you bring? Has different, yeah, meanings and burdens than if you came to me and I said, how much gold did you bring? You know? So the confusion that arises when we don't recognize that is different. Yeah? So it's not as simple as, you know, we do it the traditional way. So now we come back to what I have said before. We are all translators right now in this period of Dharma growing roots in the West. We all have to take responsibility for this translation. Take responsibility with humility. Then it's easier on ourselves and on others. You know, there's the take responsibility as, you know, I'm the one, you know. Then you have the burden of, I will get it right. And then when you don't get it right, you will silence all opposition. Because you have that burden, you know, I will get it right. So we have to take responsibility, but take responsibility with humility. Like, no, I will mess up. But my messing up is not out of, you know, egomaniac, but not perfect. Yeah, like in Jamon Kongtrul's, even in the case of the 19th century Tibet, every point in his life, whenever he asked for teachings, asked for ordination, he always struggled because he didn't come from wealth. The expectation of like, you provide a feast for the assembly. In the Gelugpa system, you know, passing the exams to become a geshe is one thing. But you have to strategize when you take your exams. Because once you pass the exams and you become a geshe, lots of offerings you have to make for the ceremony. Almost like, you know, parents marrying off their kids. And if you can't make, so I was reading another biography many years ago of this famous Gelugpa geshe. He kept delaying his examination. Why? Because he was poor. And he didn't have money. So it's 1:45, 12:45 for you all. When we don't have Karen, the time mistress, we get carried away. So hopefully you got something out of today's blah blah blah. I always feel like it's important, for us to kind of understand, like, the contexts are different. Dharma remains the same. Yes, of course, no doubt. Dharma is the same. Doesn't matter. Afflictive emotions are afflictive emotions. Purifying afflictive emotions is purifying afflictive emotions. But context, if we're not sensitive to it, we run into so many unnecessary stress and confusions. Okay, happy Halloween.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
Palmodrupa Day.
Happy chocolate covered Brussels sprouts.
Yes. Some of you know what Jim is talking about. If you don't know, it might be worth going to take a look at my latest Facebook post.
Okay, well, thank you again.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take it easy.
Yeah.
Stay healthy.
Everyone.
Yeah.